Immigration is top of mind. In fact, recent polls show that Americans are more concerned about immigration than they are about the economy. Gallup's poll says, rather, that 28% flagged immigration as the most important problem facing the country. Politicians on both sides of the aisle know that the system is broken, and there's been a lot of talk but little action on how to fix it. Last election cycle in 2020, the candidates were far apart on their solutions, and now not so much. Last month, a bill was put forth to reform the legal and illegal immigration process. It would have increased funding for border agents and immigration judges and asylum officers. The Senate GOP rejected the bill.
On Thursday night, there was some back and forth between the conservative side of the room and the president during the State of the Union address. President Biden called out Republicans for refusing to pass the Senate's bipartisan border bill and was ready to return fire when they pushed back.
In November, my team began serious negotiation with a bipartisan group of senators. The result was a bipartisan bill with the toughest set of border security reforms we've ever seen. Oh, you don't think so? Oh, you don't like that bill, huh? That conservatives got together and said it was a good bill? I'll be darned. That's amazing. I believe that given the opportunity for a majority in the House and Senate would endorse the bill as well, a majority right now. But unfortunately, politics has derailed this bill so far.
He also specifically took a shot at former President Donald Trump for working to stop that border bill and again called on Congress to act.
We need to act now. And if my predecessor is watching, instead of paying politics and pressuring members of Congress to block the bill, join me in telling the Congress to pass it. We can do it together, but that's what he apparently here's what he will not do. I will not demonize immigrants saying they are poison in the blood of our country. I will not separate families. We can fight about fixing the border, or we can fix it.
There goes Kamala again, Jess, with her awkward backyard clapping. But we talked a little bit about this earlier in the show when he went off script and actually talked about Laken Riley, the University of Georgia nursing student who was murdered by an illegal immigrant while out for a jog. That illegal immigrant had several detainers lodged against them because they had a previous criminal history in New York and Athens, but was not removed from the country because both of those places are sanctuary cities that don't work with ICE. I thought it was fascinating, and I'm surprised that Biden brought it up at all. It was something that the GOP was really leaning in on ahead of the State of the Union. They had these pins that said "Say her name" and Laken Riley on them. And Biden held up the pin, and I think he said Lincoln Riley instead of Laken, but I guess close enough, and then went on to say that line that angered some of the other members of his party, where he said that thousands of Americans are dying at the hands of illegal immigrants, which runs counter to what he said directly after that about how he didn't want to talk about immigrants the way that his predecessor did. And also encouraging the GOP to pass that Senate border bill, which I know we've broken down on this show quite a few times. We'll probably get into it again today. But what did you think of Biden's comments on immigration and that moment where he did go off script? And I think you said it earlier, sounded kind of like a Republican.
He really did there. And to start the speech talking about Ukraine, when this bill that's called the immigration bill by many. I mean, he refers to this bill as an immigration bill in the State of the Union speech later on. To start talking about Ukraine, when this bill includes $60 million in funding for Ukraine, $14.1 million for Israel, $10 billion for right? Israel is unrestricted aid. What was that?
I think it's billion, right? Is it 60 million or billion?
With a B. Yes. Yeah. It's $95 billion in total that's being allocated for foreign funding. Sorry, I was saying million. You're right. It's billion with a B. So 14.1 billion for Israel, 60 billion for Ukraine. And when this is an immigration bill where the main policy change, he also got wrong around immigration. So the asylum process is quite slow, 5 to 6+ years sometimes. And he's saying the purpose of this bill, it's a bipartisan bill, is to reduce that to 6 weeks, which is incorrect. The bill reduces that time to 6 months. So the fact that he got that time frame wrong, it's kind of important. That's the main thrust of the bill. It just made it seem like he cares far more about sending funding to Israel to purchase weapons and to Ukraine to purchase weapons, really than focusing on issues at home. I think it really highlights that there's not a lot of thought that goes into the actual immigration policy in a lot of these supposed immigration reform bills.
That's a great point. The fact that he opened the speech by talking about Ukraine and basically comparing himself to how the U.S. was when they were fighting Hitler was quite a choice. I mean, this is the state of the union presumably meaning our union. And instead of talking immediately about the United States, he decided to turn this into a foreign policy speech about the need to give more money to Ukraine, as Americans who are tuning into this obviously want to hear him talk about their major concerns, of which Ukraine is not top of mind for them. It's immigration, it's the economy, it's crime, it's abortion. And to take that direction, I thought was incredibly tone deaf. And you're right, this border bill contains significant funding for foreign wars that are essentially proxy wars that the U.S., Americans in general, are not super interested in being involved with right now. And the point about the asylum process is well taken too, because a large part of what this bill does in order to reduce that time that it takes for people to go through the asylum process is, yes, it adds more immigration judges, but it also adds asylum officers and basically exports a lot of the decision-making on asylum claims to these asylum officers. And those officers, I think, would be appointed or hired by whoever the DHS secretary is at the time. And so they'd be quite beholden to whatever the administration's policy is in regards to granting or refusing asylum claims. And so under the Biden administration, you might see them sort of rubber stamping asylum claims. If Trump were to get back into office, you'd probably see them tighten it back up. And I think if there's anything that people can agree on immigration is that if you're going to go through the process of deciding whether or not people deserve asylum, that's a legal process and it should go through a court. It should be done with due process. And I don't think asylum officers is the right way to solve this problem.
Yeah, I think, an obvious problem is that there are so many people seeking asylum, but it's such a timely process that we see the drop-off rate being incredibly high. When we have only 4% of people initiating the asylum process actually being granted asylum crossing over from Mexico, that's a very low number. And it's not because, there's, of course, 16% of people that are denied asylum, deemed ineligible for the asylum program. But you have 80% of people in the other category, which means they've dropped off entirely. So that could mean that they found a way to get documented by other means, get a work visa or what have you. But it also means that there are a lot of people who just give up on the process. Surely a fraction of these people could have been deported. But 80% of people who wanted to go through this legal process, I assume a large portion of those people weren't able to, just because it's so timely, because we don't have the investment and infrastructure there necessary to process immigrants coming over the southern border. It's very obvious. It can be judges. I'm totally fine with it being, more judges that are hired to process these immigrants coming over the southern border. But it's very obvious that's where personnel needs to be allocated. And this would placate a lot of the Republicans' concerns about people crossing over, remaining undocumented, largely because this process is so timely, and them not catching people who have a criminal history. I mean, this would satisfy that concern as well. And the fact that we're giving $95 billion in foreign aid when we really need this funding at the southern border, I mean, this is a mistake on his part. If he were to pursue, an immigration bill that allocated more funding for the processing of illegal immigrants on the southern border, of undocumented people already within the United States, I think he would win some points from the people throwing buttons at him.
Yeah, and the other thing that is involved in this too is if you're going to try to reduce the massive flow of illegal immigration, so that you have fewer people ultimately claiming asylum because you have people who are not trying to do so fraudulently. Like right now, what we see is that people cross in between ports of entry as opposed to claiming asylum at the ports of entry and then hoping they don't get caught. And when they do, they say, oh, I'm applying for asylum because they believe that they'll be able to be released into the United States, hang out for 6 to 8 years or longer as they wait to go through the process. I think it has to be coupled with border security so that you can actually reduce the number of people who are trying to do that, and you actually have people applying for asylum the right way. That would reduce the numbers too and not require us to hire thousands of more immigration judges to basically go through all of these claims. You would be able to couple it with border security so that you actually have both a timely and organized process. And unfortunately, we're out of time on this one, but we're going to be back with more Rising and more So Too coverage after this.